So Rick Wilson's joining us from South Africa.
We got West Virginia, we got Memphis, we got Alaska. We got Alberta, Barhead.
I know who it is from Alaska, I bet.
Stacy, I know Barhead well.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. I know Rick is in South Africa, so we're putting him to bed, I think. So welcome. I want to welcome everybody to the 12th episode, guys. I can't believe we've been doing this for 6 months already. So maybe we'll make money at it somehow one day. But right now, it's just glad to have you. So let's go around. I'm going to introduce our guest in a minute. I'm Jeff Tobe. And yes, you've heard Wednesday afternoon football has come to Pittsburgh. So we are in 7 inches of snow. It's still falling. And it's going to be a great game at 3:40 today when we beat the Ravens. So also in the chat box, I want to know who your football team of choice is, either CFL, NFL, or is there a World Football League? I don't even know anymore. So
yeah, they call it soccer.
let me see your fanship. And in the meantime, I'm going to let Richard Haddon introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Richard Haddon, and I'm here in Jacksonville, Florida. And you'll notice I'm not wearing a shirt from my team.
Sanjay.
Hi, my name is Sanjay Knapp, and I'm calling from just outside of Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
Mike.
And I'm Michael Kerr from beautiful Canmore, Alberta, where it is gorgeous blue sky today. And my team is the Calgary Stampeders.
I got it. Believe it or not, I grew up as a Hamilton Tiger Cats fan. I mean, are there any in the world still? I'm not sure, but quickly changed to Buffalo and now to Pittsburgh. So I'm a fair weather fan. Welcome, and I want to welcome our guest, Lenora Billings-Harris. Welcome, Lenora. I'm going to give your bio, but there's so much more to it. This is a short version. I mean, Lenora is an author. She's an internationally recognized authority in the area of inclusivity. I made up a new word. I like that. Inclusion, diversity, and bias. She's been included as one of the top 100 global thought leaders on diversity and inclusion by SHRM, which is the Society of Human Resource Management. And I think you were also named by Diversity Women Magazine as one of the top 20 most influential diversity leaders in the US. Congratulations. She's presented to audiences in 41 countries and 6 continents, including the middle of the Atlantic and middle of the Pacific Oceans. Well, I want to know about that too. But Lenora, welcome. And we will try not to overwhelm you. We're glad you're here.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. I know this is going to be fun.
Absolutely. So, of course, our topic today is diversity and inclusion. And we're going to kind of call it a lightning round, which we used to have, guys. And we'll call it that again. Maybe we'll just fire some quick questions out. If you're on, I sent the wrong link this morning, so we're going to have a lot of Jeff Tobes. If it says Jeff Tobe on it and you know how to change your name on there, that would be great. But we're glad you're here no matter what you call yourself. So I'm going to start, if that's okay with everybody. Let's start, Lenore, with just a clear understanding of what we're talking about today. And when it comes to diversity and inclusion, how do you define it, and maybe why has it become so important in today's culture, which might be a duh question, but let me throw that at you.
Okay, so diversity and inclusion. Diversity, the simple definition, my simple definition is who's on the team. Because diversity in and of itself it's really all the ways we're different and similar. And so consequently, even though when people hear diversity, they very often just think of race and gender, it really is every way that we are uniquely different. And so I describe each of us as a culture of one. So because there's nobody else quite like us. That could be good and maybe not so good in some other ways. But in any case, diversity is simply having people around you who are different from yourself. So who's on your team? So from an organizational perspective, is everybody on your team, do they look alike? Do they sound alike? Do they have generally the same values, or are they very different? And the reason you would want to have more diversity is to lead to diversity of thought. But inclusion is who gets to play. So as we think about sports teams, you want to attract the best talent, right? So you do all those things to get the best talent on your team. However, if the same people get called on all the time to do everything, you're not being very inclusive. You're not really using all of that best talent. So the idea is to know how to get diversity on your team, and then how to make sure you are really including everyone.
So, you know, the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission here in the States, has protected classes. And I think we often think of diversity as that. You're saying it's broader than that.
Yes, and it's unfortunate that when people hear diversity, they think of just compliance, because that's a baseline. It's a floor. It's the minimum that an organization must do if they are a government contractor in any way. So when organizations have diversity and inclusion strategies, still many of their employees think, oh, it's just EEO and affirmative action, which causes all kinds of problems if the organization does not clarify what they really mean by diversity and inclusion. So diversity and inclusion strategies, diversity, equity, and inclusion is what we hear about these days. Those would be the things that the organization is doing, not because the government told them to. And it's not just relative to the US, because most countries, most major countries, have some sort of baseline compliance requirements around hiring and that kind of thing. But what a lot of companies did is they just changed their EEO office of, the 70s and 80s. They changed the name to diversity, thinking that would make people feel better about it. It didn't work.
So along those lines of interpretation, you're saying that, you have your definition, and each group and each organization and each government policy umbrella will have its organization. So the idea of understanding what diversity and inclusion means to employees is vitally important. So how would you suggest an organization goes about asking those questions in surveys, or what are those questions? How do you gauge how people, check the temperature of their D&I system internally?
Yeah. It's interesting to me, every now and then someone will say, and I'm doing a number of listening sessions these days for my clients, so that they could get a better gauge of what the inclusion factor is within their organization. And some people will say, and they start out with underrepresented groups, so Black people, Asian, Pacific Islanders, Latinx, etc. And inevitably what comes up is someone will say, I want to know that when I am hired and or promoted, I wasn't just hired or promoted because I'm Black or because I'm female or because I'm whatever those quote unquote protected classes are. I want to know that I got that job because I was the best person for it. The myth is that employees will think, oh, I know why she got the job. It was because she was a woman. Because they're not thinking logically, they're thinking emotionally, and they're thinking they're losing something. That job got lost because the organization put this unqualified person in this job. Well, if you thought logically, of course that happens every now and then, but the reality is most organizations aren't going to intentionally put an unqualified person in a position. So what organizations need to do, relative to your question, is they really need to do a much better job of communicating the benefits of having a diverse and inclusive workplace. Research now shows, thank goodness I don't have to spend quite as much time on helping people understand the business case, although I still have to do it. Research shows overwhelmingly that when you have a diverse and inclusive is a critical piece because that's the harder one. Diversity is really the easy part. When you have a diverse and inclusive organization, then not only do you have higher revenue as compared to your competition, who's less diverse, but you also retain the best talent longer because people want to stay where they have a sense of belonging. You also have more innovation and creativity, and critically important, and we see these negative examples all the time, critically important is you make fewer mistakes when it comes to advertising your brand.
By the way, let me just say again, I'm very embarrassed that I sent out the wrong link today. If you're showing up as Jeff Tobe, we'd love for you to change your name if you know how to rename yourself. It's just the 3 dots in your box. It'll drop down box. It says rename, put your name in. Sorry to interrupt.
I know how to, by the way, how we can clarify that or rectify that for next week. We just won't invite Jeff Tobe, so we won't have the
Exactly right.
And don't worry, Jeff, we're embarrassed.
for you.
For me. Thank you. Thanks.
So no worries.
Next question, anybody?
Yeah, Lenora, thanks for all that. And yeah, I think that there's a growing body of research, right, that suggests it's so beneficial in so many different ways for cultures to embrace this. What if you're a culture where this is just kind of come onto your radar for the first time? It's totally new to you. You haven't thought about this topic at all. And now suddenly we're seeing it in the news everywhere, right? For some obvious and perhaps depressing reasons. What do you say to a culture where they're just kind of dipping their toes into this topic for the very first time and they don't know where to start even?
Yes,
They don't know
yes.
what to do.
You're describing several of my clients, not just clients that I do deliver presentations for, but those that I also consult with. And so where you start, and this is what my co-author and I, Rita Anderson, when we wrote the book Trailblazers, we discovered overwhelmingly those organizations that do well in this space start at the top of the organization instead of at the bottom. So instead of just doing those things relative to EEO and affirmative action, they start at the top by developing diversity and inclusion strategies that connect to business strategies. So let me give you an example. I'm working with a bank right now, and this particular bank had nothing in place. They really had never really thought about it very much until they needed to think about, should they put out some kind of statement in regards to what they support, as many organizations did in May, June, and July. And so the first step was creating a diversity and inclusion council with leadership in it, where we then can talk about what are your business strategies? Not diversity strategies, business strategies. Where do you want to be in 3 years? What markets do you want to connect to? And once they identify those types of things, what they want all of their stakeholders to say, employees, shareholders, community, then we look at that and we say, okay, can you get there without diversity and inclusion in your business? And the answer is always no. So then you identify, what do you need to do now to create more of an inclusive workplace and to attract more diversity? When you do that, and this is the hard part. So you're setting some strategic goals, and then ultimately, of course, developing action plans, and most critically, identifying KPIs, key performance indicators that you're going to hold leaders accountable for. So it gets down to behavior. And when it comes to the learning and development piece, so back to your question of when you know nothing, then these days, what really helps people understand is how our implicit or unconscious bias impacts our behavior. Because as I said earlier, diversity is the easy part. Just broaden your sourcing, do some different things to get bias out of the way of how you hire. But then once you bring people on board, what happens in everyday interactions? And so much of what we do is impacted by our unconscious bias. So I use all kinds of examples that people don't even think about, how it impacts their interactions with people different than themselves. And then it's an aha, like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. And that begins the change in behavior.
Do you have an example you could share right now?
Sure. An easy one is, well, kind of easy. I can't remember the last time I shook somebody's hand at this point, but think back to whenever that was, the last time you shook someone's hand. If you were born or raised in North America, you know the right way for people to shake hands, right? They're supposed to give you direct eye contact and a firm handshake in Western culture, in North America in particular. If they don't, you immediately start making up a story about them. Oh, this is not going to be a good leader. They're not confident. They are just not going to fit well on our team. We make up all kinds of stuff. But here's the thing. All you know about that person is they gave you a weak handshake. And so what we need to do is to back up from all of those judgments that we make about people and say, okay, yeah, I thought she was weak, but let me ask some questions. Let me get to know that person a little bit better to see if I was correct or not in my initial judgment. And most of the time, you're not going to be correct. Now, I when I was delivering in person, I would actually have people shake hands, and then the second time shake hands by intentionally giving the other person a weak handshake. And it is so important that oftentimes the participants would not even shake hands the second time, just the thought of having this weak handshake. Now, here's the catch: 2/3 of the people on our planet do not shake hands with a firm handshake and direct eye contact because it's too aggressive, or they don't even touch at all. Yet, we still assume everybody on the planet knows how to shake hands the way we've determined is the right way in North America. So think of all those people that you interact with in your organization or just in general that you're judging, when you really don't know if what your judgments are, you don't know if they're correct or not.
Great example, Lenora. And I often talk about using the wrong filters, and just what you said is, the handshake, that really is an ineffective filter because it has very little bearing on someone's actual leadership ability or whatever else you're looking at. And so that brings me to the question, how do diversity and inclusion affect employee engagement?
Yes, big, huge. Several years ago, Gallup started measuring organizations' employee engagement. And that was like the thing, the big thing that everyone was talking about. And organizations were spending thousands and millions, in some cases, dollars to have Gallup come in, and other organizations, to measure employee engagement. The missing piece was that they were not asking questions that identified biased behavior. Now, when this started, the neuroscience around bias was barely in existence. But now in 2020, there's much information that helps us know not only how our minds work, which would be psychology, but literally how our brains work. And so now that we have a better understanding of why it is we jump to those inappropriate conclusions, because all bias is not bad, by the way, but we just tend to hear about negative bias. And so those filters that we have, we now know that they were formed because of everything that's ever happened in our life. So everything that comes across our radar, so to speak, goes into our brain. Yeah, we don't look at it all the time. We just go to it when we need it. And by the way, it's not just what things that happen to you directly, it's indirect things that happen to you, watching TV, reading books, watching the movies. Something your grandmother might have said to you when you were 5 is still in our anterior cingulate cortex, that part of our brain. Now, don't worry about the word. Just think of the fact that we all have our own database in the cloud, our own personal database in the cloud. And then the emotional part of our brain goes up to that database when a circumstance happens. So going back to that handshake, we shake someone's hand and they give us this dead fish handshake. That amygdala that's connected to our nervous system goes up to our database in the cloud to immediately tell us what that means. That's what it's trying to do. Because essentially what it's trying to do is to help us decide, is this safe or dangerous? So we need it to do that, but too often in circumstances where there is no danger, it connects to the wrong information and goes through that filter. All that information that gets connected, it goes through the filter that we're most comfortable with because we've gotten information from that part of our brain. And again, that information is stereotypical. We're not analyzing it. So we have to learn how to move to our logical thinking, the slow brain, as Daniel Kahneman would call it, to get into that analytical thinking to say, kind of, okay, I heard that bias in my head, but let me just slow down and see if it applies in this moment with this person. So instead of thinking in groups, stereotypical thinking about people, we slow down to analyze the situation with that individual. And that takes conscious thought to do that.
Thing, just
I've never heard these the four of us so quiet in the entire time we've been together. Please let me just put in, Richard, I'm sorry to interrupt, but
yeah.
if you're interested, I mean, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box. We'd rather ask your questions and get your questions and your concerns answered by Lenora. So Richard, keep going. Sorry.
No, it sounds to me like, Lenore, like you're saying, just having a bias doesn't necessarily make you a bad person. I mean, we all have biases, right?
Right.
It's a matter of what do we do with those biases,
Right.
once we
Right.
recognize.
And here's an example. You can tell that I'm wearing a dark top. It's actually a black top. And because I'm doing so much work virtually now, and I have this virtual background that was created, I always wear a black top because it shows up better. But here's the other reason, that I don't have to think a whole long time on what I'm going to wear today. I know I'm going to wear a black top. So the only decision I have to make is which necklace I'm going to wear. So the black top is a bias for me. It works very well for me. When I travel, I wear a black top, black pants, and then I just wear a colorful jacket because I don't want to spend a whole lot of time packing. So that would be a positive bias for me. Now, might not work for you, but it works for me.
So, and you look beautiful in black, by the way. I spent 5 hours deciding what I was going to wear.
6 hours on your hair.
I know, at least 6 hours, Sanjay. Come on. So that's a place I could work on, perhaps. So I think we can see how this would be beneficial. Thinking about this, being more intentional about this for employee engagement. What about the broader, just competitive advantage of a business? That part, the bottom line, the money in dollars. Is there research that shows this has a substantial impact on that much coveted bottom line? And can you actually measure it? Has it been measured?
Yes, it can be measured, and places like Kellogg and Catalyst, and I mean, I could just go on and on with the organizations that are well known around the world for their research that really have been able to measure that having diversity and inclusion makes a difference. But in my own academic research, one of the things that we found that was replicated by many other people that have done research since then in this regard is that in addition to the fact that you will make more money if you have more women at the top, if you have more diversity in your boardroom and that type of thing, additionally, what we found is that the reason underrepresented best talent, so let's say Black people, women, pick whatever the underrepresented group is, the reason they don't stay with the organization is the organization spent time on trying to attract diverse talent, but they didn't do anything with the culture. They didn't do anything to change the culture to help people be more understanding and inclusive and value diversity of thought. And they left, or they leave, because their supervisors don't give them good feedback on performance, and they don't get mentored like the dominant culture does. Why would that happen? Because the dominant culture is comfortable mentoring other people just like themselves. So organizations have to make some changes in that regard to help everyone be more comfortable around people different than them. And it starts with just looking at your own environment, both internal to the organization as well as in the community. Think about who you hang out with all the time. Invite some different folks in.
Yeah, and it's like we talk about here every other Wednesday. So much of this goes back to culture, right? It begins with culture. Question in the chat box for you, just speaking of your background. Michelle wants to know how you created that beautiful virtual background.
Well, first I hired somebody on Fiverr to do it, and then I discovered it was easier than I thought. So really quick, here's how you do it. So you you create a PowerPoint slide, and then save the PowerPoint slide.
Hi, it's Richard Haddon here. For some reason, we don't know why, but Zoom stopped recording for about 13 minutes. So we have a 13-minute break in the recording here. For some of you, that might be a little reminiscent of the Watergate tape. So at least it wasn't 18 minutes, but it was all good stuff. We just didn't capture those 13 minutes, but we're going to pick up from here.
That what they just said was inappropriate. Now, you may need to do more than that, but that's at least a start.
Yeah, I like that. And coming from a place of curiosity, right? Rather than accusatory or
yes,
or defensive or getting angry. There's another question in the chat box from Dawn. Lenora, how do you deal with someone who wants to play the race card of bias whenever this person is admonished for poor or inappropriate actions or behaviors at work?
So I'm assuming that the person that asked the question is not a person of color, because that's oftentimes how it comes up. And so the first thing would be to ask yourself, why do you think it's the race card? So go internal, first of all. Now, there are some people that there's some folks that are walking around with a chip on their shoulder, waiting for somebody to knock it off. But my experience is that's not most people. In fact, what I hear most often, and certainly is my own experience, is the last thing I go to when I'm interacting with someone and it doesn't land right, where they say something that I might think is racist. The last thing I go to is that person is racist and just doesn't want me around. I'm thinking they're having a bad day. I may make up all kind of other stuff before I ever go there. But there are times when they're absolutely right. So there's such systemic racism built into societies, not just in the US, but in other places as well, that we want to at least consider that it could be, we're calling it the race card, but they're giving it the name it ought to have instead of kind of smoothing it over to make it more palatable to white people.
Okay, so I'll jump in here with a question. There's a business case for diversion and inclusion.
Diversion?
Yeah, diversion, diversity and inclusion. There's a business case. There's a moral case. There's a political case. There's a kumbaya feel good case. There's many, many cases to be made on many different facets. So why is it so many organizations have such difficulty implementing it?
Because change is not comfortable. And so that'd be one, is that, we've always done it this way and it works so well. And this one organization I'm working with, they don't have very much turnover, and that can be good or bad. And the little turnover they have when they fill a position, it's always because an employee recommends somebody else. Well, that could be a very good thing, and that happens all over the world. However, we tend to recommend people who are just like ourselves because we're comfortable with them. And so that will cause change to move very slowly. Change doesn't happen until we get uncomfortable with the status quo. And so that's why I'm encouraged about what I'm seeing now, because it isn't just Black people saying things need to change. When the protests started here in the States, it was people from all different walks of life, all socioeconomic levels, all ethnicities, gender, etc. And when you have that number, that mixture of diversity saying things need to change, then it's more likely that it's going to change. But it really comes from a comfort level and not wanting to do the work to create a more inclusive environment.
We have another question in the Q&A, so I'm just going to read that if I can. Can you help me understand the difference between speaking up when I see what I perceive to be non-inclusive behavior and the concept of being a white savior? In quotes.
Yes. So it does, first of all, what you want to do when you see something happen is take a breath. Literally, don't sigh in a person's face, but take a breath, because you're feeding oxygen to the slow brain, oxygen to the analytical part of the brain. And so you have to very quickly analyze what the risk is and what the payoff is of speaking up. I'll give you an example of something that I happened to see recently. So I was at a restaurant and everybody was appropriately spaced. We were at the bar, so there's not very many people at the bar. And this Black guy, and my husband and I happened to be at the other end of the bar, so we were not part of this exchange at all. But anyway, this Black guy came in and he had on a hoodie, and he came up to the bar, and the bartender, who happened to be white, after the Black guy said, "I'm here to pick up an order," he was a delivery person. The bartender said, "Well, you have to step back," and pretty much said it like that. And there was a white woman sitting close to this encounter. And so she interceded And she said, well, why does he have to step back? And the bartender said, because we have to keep it open for, because he was standing next to a place where someone could sit and still have the social distancing. And the white woman said, when she said, why does he have to step back? The bartender said, you know, somebody might come in and need that seat. And so the white woman said to the bartender, well, he's doing a service for you. He's picking up food from your restaurant to go to a customer. Wouldn't you want to treat him just like a customer? The bartender thought about it for a nanosecond, but, you know, kind of obviously had the expression on his face like he didn't like being reprimanded right then. But the white woman had a point. That was ally behavior. That was stepping in the moment. She may never see the delivery person again, but she determined in that moment that this was just not right. Now, in other circumstances, though, where you see two people in an encounter, especially if it's in a workplace type encounter, you don't know what their relationship is. And so sometimes it's better not to say anything directly in the moment, because maybe that person's totally okay with what just happened. But rather, if you're friends with the person you thought was offended, you go to that person to ask them if they were offended and let them know, you know, so what I heard is that was offensive to me, even though I'm not whatever the group is. Help me understand how it landed with you, so that you get more information in that regard. So there are times where stepping in the middle of it is not appropriate.
I can't believe it. You know, I don't know about you guys, but that's the fastest 45 minutes I think we've ever done. So. And we have so many more questions and comments. Lenora, thank you so much for being with us today. Before we go anywhere, though, could you tell people how to contact you and a little bit? I want you to self-promote your books, your latest book as well.
Okay, so the fastest way to connect with me is just go to my website, ubuntuglobal.com. It's spelled U. B as in boy, U, N as in never, T as in Tom, U, and the word global, ubuntuglobal.com. And you'll see all kinds of information, and you can send me an email that way. I'm on social media all over the place. You can follow me on Twitter at LBH Diversity, because my last name's too long to fit in any of the social media things. And the two books that I have, one is The Diversity Advantage, A Guide to Making Diversity Work. It was written a few years back. However, it's very easy read for some of those questions you don't want to ask anybody that I answer in the book. So it gives you some baseline information. And the other book is more of a diversity strategy book, Trailblazers. And the best way to find Trailblazers, best way to find both of them actually, is to go on Amazon.com. But instead of typing in the name of the book, because you can't copyright a title, type in my name, Lenora Billings-Harris, and then my books will pop up.
Excellent. I know I speak for all the guys.
I put the website at ubuntuglobal.com in the chat box.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I did it and spelled it wrong. So, Mike, I'm going to let you. Thank you so much, guys. Mike, I'm going to let you take us out of here.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you again, Lenora, for your brilliance. Thank you so much for honoring us with your time. I know there were some questions in the chat box that we didn't maybe get to, but you know what, folks? Reach out to Lenora. I'm sure she would welcome your questions. Reach out to us if you have questions. If there's anything the Every Other Wednesday Culture Club gang can help you with. So
besides learning how to use technology.
So 2 announcements. First of all, a reminder to mark your calendars now and invite everybody you know, invite your pets, invite your family members, your coworkers, your bosses to our next Every Other Wednesday, which is going to be, believe it or not, Wednesday, December 16th, where we are going to be closing out the year with a very fun topic, one dear and near to my heart: how to have more fun at work, putting humor to work for less stress and more success, how to bring the fun for 2021 when we desperately need it without getting fired. So we're going to share all sorts of fun ideas on how to bring the fun safely to your workplace. And you'll want to set the dates aside, January 21st and 22nd, for our first virtual summit. We are going to have all sorts of guest speakers. We are going to have all sorts of great, engaging, interactive sessions to help you take your culture to its next level of rocking success. Jeff, can you put the website address in the chat box?
I just did. It's eowednesdayretreat.com. Register now. And truly, I know they say it, but we're going to fill up quickly. So please go register, and we'll see you on the 21st and 22nd of January.
Yeah, looking so forward to it.
Well,
So once again,
thank you, everybody.
yeah, thank you. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, Lenora, again. And thank you, everybody who joined us for this every other Wednesday. We will see you in 2 weeks.
Go Steelers.